The widow Josephine Edwards had been sleeping in the back room of the Dusty Rose Saloon for 3 weeks when Austin Fairchild first walked through those swinging doors, and she knew right then that her life was about to change forever. It was May of 1878, and the heat in Sonora, Texas, had already begun its relentless assault on the town, turning the streets to dust and making every breath feel like inhaling hot sand. Josephine was wiping down the long mahogany bar when she heard his spurs jingling across the wooden floor, and when she looked up, she found herself staring into the most honest pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. He was tall, this stranger, with sun-darkened skin and hands that looked like they had worked hard every day of his life. His clothes were worn but clean, and unlike most of the men who frequented the saloon, he removed his hat when he approached the bar. That simple gesture of respect made something flutter in Josephine's chest, though she quickly pushed the feeling down. She had been a widow for 4 months now, and the gossips in Sonora already whispered plenty about her living situation without her adding fuel to their fire. "Whiskey, please," he said, his voice low and steady. "Been riding since dawn." Josephine poured him a generous measure, noting how he waited until she set the bottle down before reaching for his glass. Most men would have grabbed it right out of her hand. "New in town?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral and professional. "Just arrived. Name's Austin Fairchild. I'm looking to buy the old Henderson ranch outside town. Heard the family moved back east after the drought hit." "That's right. 3 years ago now." Josephine found herself studying his face, the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, the firm set of his jaw that spoke of determination. "You planning to ranch cattle? Horses, mostly. I've got a gift with them, or so I've been told." He took a sip of his whiskey and set the glass down carefully. "What about you? You work here long?" Before Josephine could answer, the saloon owner, Marcus Webb, emerged from his office at the back. He was a portly man with a red face and small, calculating eyes that never missed an opportunity for profit. "Josephine, those bottles won't stock themselves. Get to work." Austin's expression hardened slightly as he watched Josephine hurry to comply, gathering empty bottles from the tables where last night's customers had left them. The morning light streaming through the dirty windows illuminated the dark circles under her eyes, the way her black morning dress hung a bit too loose on her frame. "She your wife?" Austin asked Marcus, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Her? No. She's my employee, widow woman with nowhere else to go. I provide room and board in exchange for her labor." Marcus said it like he was doing Josephine a tremendous favor, and Austin's grip on his glass tightened. "Room and board," Austin repeated slowly. "Where exactly does she sleep?" "Back room off the kitchen. It's more than adequate." Austin finished his whiskey and set down a coin that was worth twice what the drink cost. "I'll be staying at the boarding house if anyone needs to reach me about the ranch purchase." He tipped his hat to Josephine, who had paused in her work to listen. "Madam." For the rest of that day, Josephine found her thoughts drifting back to the stranger with the kind eyes. It was foolish, she told herself. She was 24 years old, and her husband Thomas had only been dead since January. What would people say if they saw her even looking at another man? But then again, people in Sonora had already made up their minds about her. When Thomas died from pneumonia, his debts had come to light, debts that exceeded the value of everything they owned. The bank had taken their small house, and Josephine had been left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a trunk of personal belongings. Marcus Webb had offered her work and shelter, and she had accepted because the alternative was leaving town or worse. The back room where Josephine slept was barely larger than a closet. It held a narrow cot, a small table with a chipped wash basin, and a hook on the wall for her few dresses. At night, she could hear the noise from the saloon, the laughter and cursing and occasional fights that Marcus was too cheap to properly control. She could hear the working girls upstairs entertaining their customers, their footsteps creaking across the old floorboards. It was not a respectable place for any woman to live, let alone sleep, but Josephine had learned to be grateful for small mercies. At least she had a roof over her head and food in her belly, even if the food was usually whatever scraps came back from the kitchen. That evening, as Josephine served drinks to the usual crowd of cowboys and drifters, she noticed Austin Fairchild enter the saloon again. He found a table in the corner and ordered dinner along with another whiskey. She brought him both, acutely aware of how his gaze followed her movements around the room. "How's the beef stew?" he asked when she set the bowl in front of him. "Honestly, it's mostly potatoes and carrots with a few pieces of meat floating around, but it'll fill you up." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Appreciate the honesty. Sit with me for a minute." Josephine glanced nervously toward the bar where Marcus was watching. "I shouldn't. I've got work to do. Just 1 minute, please." There was something in his voice that made her pull out the chair across from him. She sat on the edge of it, ready to spring up the moment Marcus called her name. Austin leaned forward, his expression serious. "I don't mean to overstep, madam, but this is no place for you. I saw that room where you sleep. It's not fit for storage, let alone a person." Heat flooded Josephine's cheeks. "You had no right to go snooping around." "I didn't snoop. The door was open when I passed by on my way to the outhouse. I saw the cot and the conditions, and it made me angry on your behalf. My circumstances are my own concern, Mr. Fairchild. I appreciate whatever sympathy you're feeling, but I'm managing just fine. Are you?" His gray eyes held hers steadily. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Marcus Webb is taking advantage of a woman in a difficult situation. He's got you working from dawn until the saloon closes, and I'd bet money he's barely paying you anything beyond that cramped little room and 1 meal a day." Josephine stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You don't know anything about my situation. Then tell me I'm wrong." She opened her mouth to do exactly that, but the words would not come. Because he was not wrong, Marcus paid her nothing in actual money. She worked 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and the meals he provided were usually leftovers or the cheapest ingredients his cook could find. She had asked him several times about wages, but he always said she owed him for the room and board, and until she worked off that debt, there would be no money changing hands. "That's what I thought," Austin said quietly. "Listen, I know we just met, and I know this is going to sound strange, but I'm going to be living on that ranch once the papers are signed. It's a big house, needs a lot of fixing up. There are 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a parlor. I could use someone to help get the place in order, do the cooking and such. I'd pay fair wages, and you'd have your own room with a real bed and a lock on the door." "You're offering me a job." Josephine's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Yes, madam. A respectable job with respectable pay and respectable living conditions. And what would people say about a widow woman living alone on a ranch with a bachelor? I suppose they'd say whatever they're already saying about you living in a saloon. The difference is, on the ranch, you'd have your dignity and your independence. You could save your wages, maybe even leave town someday if that's what you wanted." "Josephine," Marcus's voice cut through the noise of the saloon, "stop bothering the customers and get back to work." She looked at Austin one more time, seeing something in his face that looked almost like hope, then turned and walked away. But his offer stayed with her for the rest of the night, playing over and over in her mind like a melody she could not forget. 3 days passed before Josephine saw Austin again. She had almost convinced herself that he had left town or changed his mind about the ranch. Then one afternoon, as she was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the saloon, a wagon pulled up and Austin climbed down from the driver's seat. "Afternoon, Mrs. Edwards. I was hoping I might have a word with you. I'm working, Mr. Fairchild. I can see that. This will only take a moment." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The papers are signed. The Henderson place is mine now. I'm heading out there today to start cleaning up, and my offer still stands. In fact, I'm prepared to sweeten it. $20 a month plus room and board, and Sundays off." $20 was more money than Josephine had seen in one place since Thomas died. It was enough to start rebuilding her life, to maybe even buy back some of the possessions she had been forced to sell. But still, she hesitated. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Austin was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "My mother was widowed young. I watched her struggle for years because people either pitied her or took advantage of her. She never quite got back on her feet before she died. I swore then that if I ever had the means to help a woman in similar circumstances, I would. So yes, I'm offering you this job partly because I need the help, but I'm also offering it because I can, and because I think you deserve better than what you've got." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had not cried in months, not since the funeral, and she was not about to start now in the middle of the street. "I'd need to give Marcus notice. Give him notice right now. I'll wait." The conversation with Marcus went exactly as Josephine had expected. He blustered and threatened, told her she was making a mistake and that no decent woman would live alone with a man on a ranch. He said she still owed him money for all the room and board he had provided, and that if she left without working it off, he would tell everyone in town what an ungrateful wretch she was. Josephine stood in his office and listened to it all with her chin held high. When he finally ran out of steam, she said simply, "I'm leaving today. You can say whatever you want about me. You were going to anyway." She packed her belongings in less than 10 minutes. Everything she owned in the world fit into one battered trunk and a carpet bag. Austin loaded them into the wagon without comment, then helped her up onto the seat beside him. As they pulled away from the Dusty Rose Saloon, Josephine did not look back. The ride out to the ranch took about 30 minutes. The land was dry and brown from the late spring heat, but Josephine could see the potential in it. There were rolling hills dotted with mesquite trees, and in the distance, she could see a creek bed that probably ran full during the rainy season. The house itself was a surprise. It was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure built from local stone and timber. The roof looked sound, and though the place clearly needed work, it had good bones. Previous owners built it about 15 years ago, Austin explained as he helped her down from the wagon. They had big plans, wanted to raise cattle and maybe horses. But the drought killed those dreams. They held on as long as they could, then sold to me for less than the land is worth. Inside, the house was dusty and filled with cobwebs, but Josephine could see that Austin had not been exaggerating about it needing work. The furniture that remained was solid but worn. The kitchen had a good cast iron stove and a hand pump for water. Upstairs, there were indeed 3 bedrooms, each one larger than the entire back room she had been living in at the saloon. "This one here on the left, that's yours if you want it," Austin said, pushing open a door to reveal a room with a real bed frame, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the front of the property. "I had a woman from town come out yesterday and put fresh linens on the bed, air the place out a bit. There's a lock on the door like I promised. The key is on the dresser." Josephine walked into the room slowly, almost afraid to believe it was real. The bed had an actual mattress, and when she pressed her hand against it, she found it was stuffed with something soft, probably cotton or wool. The window had curtains, faded but clean. There was even a small rug beside the bed. "You did all this for me." Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I did all this because it needed doing," Austin replied. "This is your home now, Josephine, for as long as you want it to be." She turned to face him, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in a few days than anyone had in months. "Why do you keep calling me Josephine? Everyone else calls me Mrs. Edwards or just widow woman." "Because you have a name and it's a pretty one. You should hear it said out loud." That night, Josephine slept in a real bed for the first time since Thomas died. She locked her door and lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch. An owl hooted somewhere outside. The wind rustled through the trees. And downstairs, she could hear Austin moving around, probably settling into his own room. She had been terrified that he would expect something from her, some kind of payment beyond her labor for his kindness. But he had been nothing but respectful, had shown her the whole house including his room on the opposite end of the hallway from hers, and had told her to rest well, because they had a lot of work ahead of them. The next morning, Josephine woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. She dressed quickly in one of her plain work dresses and went downstairs to find Austin already up, standing at the stove. "Morning," he said with a smile. "I hope you like your coffee strong. I never quite got the hang of making it any other way." "Strong is perfect." She accepted the cup he poured for her and took a grateful sip. "What do you want me to start on today?" "Well, I was thinking you might want to take it easy your first day, get settled in properly." "Mr. Fairchild, you're paying me $20 a month. I intend to earn every penny of it." His smile widened. "In that case, I thought we could work on the kitchen together. Get it properly cleaned and organized so you can cook comfortably. I've got supplies coming from town later today. Flour, sugar, salt, coffee, dried beans, bacon, and some fresh vegetables if they have them. We'll need to figure out our meals for the week." They spent the morning scrubbing the kitchen from top to bottom. Austin proved to be a hard worker who did not shy away from any task, no matter how menial. He washed windows while Josephine scoured the stove. They worked side by side at the big wooden table, cleaning years of dust and grime from its surface. As they worked, they talked. Austin told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to work with horses from his father, about his dream of building a ranch where he could breed and train quality stock. "What about you?" he asked as they took a break for lunch, sitting at the now clean table with simple sandwiches made from bread and cheese he had bought in town. "What were your dreams before everything happened?" Josephine was quiet for a moment, surprised to realize how long it had been since anyone had asked her about herself. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said finally. "I love to read, and I love children. I thought maybe I could run a small school, help educate the young ones in whatever town we settled in." "What stopped you?" "Life, I suppose. I met Thomas when I was 19. He was charming and handsome, and he said all the right things. We married quickly, maybe too quickly. By the time I realized he was not very good with money, we were already struggling. He was always chasing the next big opportunity, the next sure thing. Nothing ever panned out. Then he got sick last winter, and by the time the doctor finally came, it was too late. I'm sorry." That must have been incredibly hard. The hardest part was finding out about all the debts after he died. I had no idea how much he owed. The banker showed up at our house 3 days after the funeral and told me I had a week to vacate. I sold everything that wasn't claimed by creditors, and it still was not enough. That's when Marcus Webb made his offer. Austin's jaw tightened. Men like Webb make me sick. They see someone vulnerable and they circle like vultures. Well, I'm not vulnerable anymore. Thanks to you, I have a chance to start over. You'll sleep in a respectable house from tonight on, Austin said firmly, and you'll be treated with the respect you deserve. That's a promise. The words settled over Josephine like a warm blanket. For the first time in months, she felt safe. She felt valued. And as she looked across the table at Austin, with his honest eyes and his kind smile, she felt something else beginning to stir in her chest. Something that felt dangerously like affection. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Josephine rose early each morning to make breakfast for herself and Austin. Eggs and bacon, flapjacks with syrup, biscuits with gravy, whatever she could manage with the supplies they had. After breakfast, they would work together on various projects around the ranch. They repaired fences, cleared brush, painted the barn that stood behind the house. Austin was true to his word about Sundays off, and on their first Sunday together, he hitched up the wagon and drove them into town for church services. The gossips had a field day, of course. Josephine could feel their eyes on her as she walked into the small church building. She heard the whispers, saw the disapproving looks from some of the town's more prominent ladies. But Austin stayed right beside her, his presence a solid comfort. They sat together in a pew near the back, and when the service ended, Austin introduced her to several people as his housekeeper, emphasizing the word in a way that made it clear the arrangement was completely proper. After church, they walked through town so Josephine could buy a few personal items she needed. Austin waited patiently outside the general store while she selected thread and needles, a new hairbrush to replace her broken one, and a bar of nice soap that smelled like lavender. When she tried to pay with some of the advance wages Austin had given her, the shopkeeper, an older woman named Clara Morrison, waved her money away. "I heard what happened with Thomas's debts," Clara said quietly. "That was not your fault, and I always thought you got a raw deal. If you're working honest for your keep now, that's all anyone should care about. The soap is a gift. Welcome back to decent society, Josephine." The kindness brought tears to Josephine's eyes for the second time in a week. She thanked Clara profusely and left the store feeling lighter than she had in ages. Austin was leaning against the wagon, his hat tilted back on his head, and when he saw her face, he smiled. "Good visit. Better than I expected. Maybe not everyone in Sonora is ready to condemn me. Anyone with sense can see you're a good woman who caught some bad luck. The rest of them aren't worth worrying about." They drove back to the ranch in companionable silence, and Josephine found herself studying Austin's profile. He was handsome, there was no denying that, but it was more than his looks that drew her. It was the way he treated her like a person of value. The way he asked her opinion on things and actually listened to her answers. The way he made her laugh with his dry observations about life. She had known him less than 2 weeks, but already she felt more connected to him than she had ever felt to Thomas, even at the best moments of their marriage. That realization should have frightened her, but instead, it filled her with a cautious hope. As May turned into June, the heat in Sonora intensified. The work on the ranch became more challenging, but also more rewarding. Austin's first horses arrived, a small herd of 6 mares and 1 stallion, all of them wild caught from the Texas plains and in need of gentling. Josephine watched from the fence of the training corral as Austin worked with them, his movements patient and sure. He had not been exaggerating about his gift with horses. Even the most skittish mare seemed to calm under his touch, responding to his quiet voice and gentle persistence. "How do you do that?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the hills. "Do what? Make them trust you so quickly?" That buckskin mare was practically feral when she arrived, and now she's eating out of your hand." Austin considered the question, taking a sip of the coffee Josephine had brought out for him. "I suppose it's about understanding what they need. Horses are prey animals. They're always watching for danger, always ready to run. If you come at them with force or aggression, you just confirm their fears. But if you're patient, if you show them consistently that you're not going to hurt them, eventually they decide to trust you. Is that how you approach everything in life?" He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "I try to. Especially with people who have been hurt before. Force and pressure just drive them away. But patience, kindness, giving them space to heal, that's how you build something real." The air between them felt charged, and Josephine knew they were not really talking about horses anymore. She should probably stand up, excuse herself, go back inside where it was safe. But she did not want to. She wanted to stay right here, sitting beside Austin as the last light faded from the sky. "I never thanked you properly," she said quietly, "for everything you've done for me. You changed my life, Austin. You don't need to thank me. Watching you come back to yourself these past few weeks, seeing you smile and laugh again, that's all the thanks I need." "I wasn't aware I had stopped smiling." "You hadn't, not entirely. But there's a difference between a polite smile and a real one. You're giving real ones now." Josephine felt warmth spread through her chest. "You pay too much attention, Mr. Fairchild. Maybe. Or maybe I just think you're worth paying attention to." He stood then, stretching his arms over his head. "I should head to bed. Morning comes early around here." "Yes, it does. Good night, Austin." "Good night, Josephine." She sat on the porch for a while longer after he went inside, her thoughts swirling. She was falling for him. There was no point in denying it anymore. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The answer came to her unexpectedly one afternoon in late June. A storm had blown in from the west, a rare summer rainstorm that turned the dry creek bed into a rushing torrent and pounded the ranch house with wind and water. Josephine was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard a crash from the barn, followed by the panicked whinnying of horses. She ran to the window and saw that part of the barn roof had collapsed, probably weakened by years of neglect, and now unable to withstand the storm's assault. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and ran outside into the driving rain. She could see Austin already in the barn, working frantically to move the horses out of danger. The buckskin mare was rearing in her stall, terrified by the noise and the debris falling around her. Josephine ran to help, throwing open stall doors and guiding horses out into the corral where, despite the rain, they would be safer than inside a potentially collapsing structure. Austin was struggling with the stallion, who was too panicked to be reasoned with. "Get out of here," he shouted to Josephine over the roar of the storm. "It's not safe." "I'm not leaving you," she shouted back, grabbing a rope and approaching the stallion from the side. She had watched Austin work with these horses for weeks now, had absorbed his techniques even without trying. She kept her movements slow and steady, talking to the animal in a low, calm voice that somehow cut through his panic. The stallion's ears swiveled toward her, and she took advantage of his momentary distraction to slip the rope over his neck and lead him toward the open door. Together, she and Austin got all 7 horses safely out of the barn just as another section of roof gave way with a groan of protesting timber. They stood in the rain, breathing hard, watching the barn's partial collapse with wide eyes. If they had been just a few minutes slower, if Josephine had not come to help, Austin might have been trapped inside. He turned to her, rain streaming down his face, and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was sudden and fierce, and Josephine could feel his heart pounding against hers. "You could have been killed," he said into her hair. "Why did you come out here? Because you needed help. Because I couldn't just stand in the house and do nothing while you were in danger." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands coming up to frame her cheeks. "Josephine, He trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words he wanted to say. "What?" she whispered, her own hands coming up to rest on his chest. "I'm falling in love with you. I know it's too soon. I know you're still mourning your husband. I know 1,000 reasons why I shouldn't be saying this. But I almost died just now, and life's too short not to tell the truth. I'm falling in love with you, and I have been almost since the day we met." Josephine felt something break open inside her chest, some dam she had been building to hold back her own feelings. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I feel guilty about it, like I'm betraying Thomas's memory, but I can't help it. You make me feel alive again, Austin. You make me feel like myself. You're not betraying anyone. You're allowed to live, Josephine. You're allowed to be happy." Then he was kissing her, or she was kissing him. She could not tell who moved first. All she knew was that his lips were on hers, warm and insistent despite the cold rain pouring down around them. She kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past months, all the grief and fear and loneliness she had been carrying. And underneath all of that, she felt joy, pure and bright and undeniable. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. Austin kept his forehead pressed against hers, his eyes closed. "We should probably get the horses settled," he said, though he made no move to let her go. "We probably should," Josephine agreed, not moving either. In the end, it took them another hour to get the horses calmed down and secured in the smaller stable that stood adjacent to the damaged barn. By the time they made it back to the house, both of them were soaked to the skin and shivering. Josephine insisted Austin change into dry clothes immediately while she did the same. When they met again in the kitchen, both dressed in fresh, dry outfits, an awkwardness had settled between them. "About what I said," Austin began, but Josephine cut him off. "Don't you dare take it back. Don't you dare tell me it was just the heat of the moment or that you didn't mean it." "I wasn't going to. I was going to say that I meant every word, but I don't want to rush you. You've been through so much, and the last thing I want is to make you feel pressured." Josephine crossed the kitchen to stand in front of him. "The only thing I feel is grateful. Grateful that you're alive, grateful that you're here, grateful that you had the courage to tell me the truth. I meant what I said too, Austin. I'm falling in love with you." He reached out and took her hand, threading their fingers together. "So what do we do now? I don't know. I suppose we take it one day at a time. We keep working together, living together, learning about each other, and we see where this goes. I can do that." He squeezed her hand gently. "Are you hungry? I could probably throw together something for dinner." "You're not cooking. That's my job, remember." But she was smiling as she said it, and when Austin pulled her close for another quick kiss, she did not resist. The storm passed overnight, leaving the ranch washed clean and the air smelling of rain and mesquite. In the morning, Austin and Josephine surveyed the damage to the barn. It was significant but not catastrophic. With work and materials, it could be repaired. Austin made arrangements to buy lumber from the mill in town, and over the next few weeks, he spent his days rebuilding while Josephine managed the house and helped where she could. Their relationship shifted into something new and wonderful. They were still employer and employee on paper, but in practice, they were becoming partners. Austin asked Josephine's opinion on everything from where to place fence posts to what color to paint the repaired barn. She helped him train the horses, discovering that she had a gentle touch that the animals responded to well. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, talking about their days, their dreams, their past hurts and future hopes. Austin told her about his father, who had died when Austin was 16, leaving him to care for his mother and younger sister. How he had worked himself nearly to death for years, saving every penny until his mother passed and his sister married. How he had taken his savings and headed west, determined to build something of his own. Josephine told him about her childhood in Louisiana, about losing both her parents to yellow fever when she was 12, about being raised by an aunt who was kind but distant. How she had felt lost and alone until Thomas came along, how she had mistaken his charm for stability. "I thought he would take care of me," she admitted one night as they sat watching fireflies dance in the darkness. "I thought marriage meant security. I was so naive." "You were young and had been through a lot. You wanted someone to make you feel safe. That's not naive, that's human." "Do you make me feel safe?" she asked, turning to look at him. Austin met her gaze steadily. "I hope so, I want to. But more than that, I want you to know you can make yourself safe. You're strong, Josephine, stronger than you give yourself credit for. You survived losing everything and now look at you. You're building a whole new life." "We're building a whole new life," she corrected gently. "Together." In July, a traveling preacher came through Sonora, and Austin surprised Josephine by suggesting they attend the Sunday service in town. It had been several weeks since they had been to town together, both of them too busy with ranch work to make the trip. Josephine put on her best dress, a dark green calico that she had sewn herself from fabric Austin had bought her, and pinned up her hair with extra care. When they arrived at the church, they were greeted by Clara Morrison from the general store. "Josephine, Austin, how wonderful to see you both." "The ranch is doing well, I hope." "Very well, thank you," Austin replied. "We've been busy rebuilding the barn and working with the horses. I heard about the storm damage. That must have been frightening." Clara's eyes moved between them, and Josephine saw the moment when understanding dawned on the older woman's face. She saw how Austin and Josephine stood close together, how their hands almost but not quite touched. She saw the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. Instead of disapproval, Clara's face broke into a warm smile. "Well, you both look happy and healthy. That's what matters. You should stop by the store after the service. I just got in a new shipment of goods from Austin, some lovely fabrics and some imported tea." Inside the church, Josephine noticed that the whispers and stares from their first visit together had diminished. People were getting used to seeing them as a pair, she realized. The scandal of the widow living on the bachelor's ranch had faded into acceptance, helped along by the fact that both Austin and Josephine conducted themselves with obvious respectability. After the service, they did stop by Clara's store, where Josephine admired the new fabrics while Austin discussed seed prices with Clara's husband. As they were leaving, Clara pressed a small package into Josephine's hands. "What's this?" Josephine asked. "Just a little something." "Open it when you get home." On the ride back to the ranch, Josephine carefully unwrapped the package to find several yards of beautiful ivory lace and a note in Clara's handwriting. "For when you're ready to stop mourning and start living again." Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes. The meaning was clear. Clara was giving her permission, in a sense, to move forward with her life, to stop wearing black and embrace color again, to let go of widowhood and reach for something new. "What is it?" Austin asked, noticing her expression. Wordlessly, she showed him the lace and the note. He read it, then looked at her with such tenderness that her breath caught. "She's right, you know. You don't have to wear black forever. Thomas would want you to be happy." "Would he?" Josephine's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure he thought about what I wanted even when he was alive." "Then think about what you want now. Forget about what anyone else expects or thinks you should do. What does Josephine Edwards want for her life?" She looked at him, This good man who had given her so much and knew exactly what her answer was. I want to be with you. I want to build a life here on this ranch. I want to laugh and work and maybe even have a family someday. I want all the things I thought I had lost forever. Austin pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the road. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Marry me, Josephine. I know it hasn't been that long and maybe people will talk, but I don't care. I love you. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build this ranch with you, raise horses and children and grow old together. Marry me. Josephine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Austin, if you're not ready, I understand. We can wait as long as you need, but I want you to know where I stand. I want you to know that this isn't just a temporary thing for me. You're not just my housekeeper or my friend. You're the woman I love, and I want to make you my wife. Yes, she said, the word coming out choked with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you. I don't care what people think either. I love you, Austin Fairchild, and I want to be your wife. He kissed her then, right there in the wagon with the sun beating down on them and the horses stamping impatiently to continue home. It was a kiss full of promise and hope, and the kind of deep joy that Josephine had never thought she would feel again. They set the wedding for late August, giving themselves time to make arrangements and, more importantly, to allow a respectable amount of time to pass since Thomas's death. It would be almost 8 months, which was not the full year of mourning that tradition dictated, but Josephine found she did not care. She had mourned Thomas, had honored their marriage in her own way, but she was ready to move forward now. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity. Josephine sewed herself a new dress using the ivory lace Clara had given her, and some pale blue fabric that Austin insisted on buying. She cleaned the ranch house from top to bottom, making it ready to be not just a place where they worked but a true home. Austin worked on finishing the barn repairs and building a proper chicken coop so they could have fresh eggs. He also surprised Josephine by building a small addition onto the house, a cozy sitting room with large windows that let in plenty of light. For your reading, he explained when he showed it to her. You mentioned once that you love books. I thought you should have a space that's just yours. Josephine threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. You built me a library, a small one. We'll fill it with books over time, but yes, I suppose I did. They were married on the 25th of August, 1878, in the small church in Sonora. Clara Morrison stood up as Josephine's witness, and the man Austin had hired to help with the ranch, a weathered cowboy named Sam, stood up for him. The preacher kept the ceremony short and simple, which suited both of them fine. What mattered was not the length of the service, but the vows they spoke to each other. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Austin kissed Josephine with such tenderness that several women in the small congregation sighed audibly. They walked out of the church hand in hand, officially starting their new life together. The reception was held at the ranch, and to Josephine's surprise and delight, quite a few people from town made the journey out to celebrate with them. Clara and her husband came, bringing a beautiful quilt as a wedding gift. The banker who had foreclosed on Josephine's old house even showed up, looking sheepish, and handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "After your husband died, we sold his possessions to cover the debts. There was a small amount left over, about $15. I should have given it to you at the time, but honestly, I forgot about it until I heard you were getting married. Consider it a wedding gift, or rather, what should have been yours all along." $15 would not change her life, but the gesture of finally getting what was owed to her felt like a closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. She thanked the banker graciously and tucked the envelope away. As the sun set on their wedding day, Austin and Josephine finally found themselves alone. Their guests had departed, the house was quiet, and they stood together in the kitchen, suddenly shy with each other despite everything they had been through. "I can't quite believe this is real," Josephine said softly. "6 months ago, I was sleeping in a closet behind a saloon, convinced my life was over. And now I'm here, married to you, living in this beautiful house." Austin pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Your life was never over, Josephine. It was just waiting for a new beginning." That night, they shared a bed for the first time as husband and wife, and Josephine finally understood the difference between obligation and desire, between duty and love. Thomas had never made her feel the way Austin did, had never taken the time to learn what brought her joy. But Austin was patient and attentive, and by the time the moon rose high above the ranch, Josephine felt completely and utterly cherished. The fall and winter passed in a haze of happiness. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Austin's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and buyers started coming from all over Texas to purchase his gentle broke animals. Josephine managed the household finances with a skill that impressed even her, carefully saving a portion of their profits each month. She also started tutoring children from some of the nearby ranches, fulfilling her old dream of teaching in a small way. In December, she realized she was pregnant. She told Austin on Christmas morning, her hands shaking as she placed his hand on her still flat belly. His face went through a rapid series of emotions: surprise, joy, worry, and then pure elation. "We're going to have a baby." His voice cracked on the last word. "We're going to have a baby," she confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. He picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, both of them giddy with excitement. When he set her down, he immediately became anxious. "Should I have done that? Is spinning safe? Do you need to sit down? Should we get the doctor?" "Austin, I'm pregnant, not made of glass. I'm fine." "We're fine." But he fussed over her anyway, and Josephine found she did not mind. It was nice to be cared for, to have someone worry about her well-being, not out of obligation but out of genuine love. Their son was born in late July of 1879. A hot summer day, much like the day when Austin had first walked into the Dusty Rose Saloon. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Josephine truly thought she might die. But Austin stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And when their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, she knew that every moment of pain had been worth it. They named him Thomas James Fairchild, honoring both of the men in Josephine's life. And from the moment Austin held his son, Josephine knew she had made the right choice in marrying him. He was a natural father, patient and loving and completely devoted. The years that followed were full of both challenges and triumphs. The ranch continued to grow, and eventually they were able to hire more help, taking some of the burden off themselves. Josephine gave birth to a daughter, Margaret Rose, in 1881, and then another son, Daniel Austin, in 1884. The house that had once seemed so large felt perfectly sized for their growing family. Josephine never forgot where she had come from, and she made sure her children understood the value of compassion and hard work. She often thought about the woman she had been, sleeping in that tiny room behind the saloon, believing she had nothing left to offer the world. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep, and she and Austin would sit on the porch watching the stars, she would sometimes tell him how grateful she was. He would always shake his head and tell her she had nothing to be grateful for, that she had earned everything she had through her own strength and determination. "You were the one who took the chance," he would say. You were the one who was brave enough to leave the saloon, to trust a stranger, to believe you deserved better. I just offered you an opportunity. You're the one who seized it. Maybe he was right. Or maybe the truth was somewhere in between. Maybe it had taken both of them, two people who had known loss and hardship, finding each other at exactly the right moment. In the spring of 1890, 12 years after they first met, Austin surprised Josephine by announcing he had bought the Dusty Rose Saloon. Marcus Webb had finally drunk himself into an early grave, and the property had gone up for sale. "Why on earth would you buy that place?" Josephine asked, genuinely confused. "Because I'm going to tear it down and build something better. I was thinking a school, a proper one with a real teacher." He smiled at her. Someone who has always dreamed of educating children. Tears filled Josephine's eyes. After all these years, he still found ways to surprise her, to show her how much he listened and cared. "A school, a school. We'll hire someone to run it, of course, since you've got your hands full with our 3 wild ones. But it'll be yours to oversee, to shape into what you always wanted." The Sonora School opened in the fall of 1891, a bright, airy building that stood where the Dusty Rose Saloon had once cast its shadow. Josephine hired a young teacher fresh from a training college in Austin, a smart woman named Elizabeth who reminded Josephine of herself at that age. The school served children from all over the county, and Josephine visited regularly, donating books from her personal library, and sometimes giving lessons when Elizabeth needed help. It felt like the final piece clicking into place, the last chapter of her old life closing so something new could begin. She was no longer the destitute widow living in a saloon. She was Josephine Fairchild, wife, mother, rancher, and benefactor. She was respected in the community, loved by her family, and content in a way she had never imagined possible. Their children grew strong and capable. Thomas, their eldest, showed his father's gift with horses and eventually took over much of the training operation. Margaret proved to have a head for numbers and managed the ranch's accounts with skill that surpassed even her mother's. Daniel, the youngest, was the dreamer, always with his nose in a book, and Josephine secretly hoped he might become a teacher himself someday. As the years passed and the 1890s gave way to a new century, Austin and Josephine settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative. They had built something lasting not just in the ranch but in their family and in themselves. On warm summer evenings, they would still sit on the porch just like they had all those years ago, watching the sun set over the Texas hills. Their hair had gray in it now, and their bodies moved a bit slower, but their love had only deepened with time. "You ever regret it?" Josephine asked him one evening in the summer of 1903. Their children were grown now. Thomas was married with a child of his own, and the house felt too quiet sometimes. "Regret what?" "Taking a chance on a desperate widow living in a saloon. Your life might have been simpler if you had just hired a normal housekeeper." Austin took her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar lines of her palm. "My life might have been simpler, but it would have been infinitely emptier. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine Fairchild. Then, now, and forever." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "You changed my life," she whispered. "You gave me back myself." "No, darling, you did that. I just provided a safe place for you to heal and grow. Everything else, all the strength and courage and beauty, that was always yours." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Josephine thought about that first day when Austin had walked into the saloon. She thought about his words, "You will sleep in a respectable house from tonight on." He had kept that promise and so many others. He had given her not just a respectable house but a home, Not just a job, but a partnership. Not just safety, but love. And she had given him the same in return. Together, they had built a life that neither of them could have created alone. They had taken two broken pieces and made something whole and beautiful. Their grandchildren would play on the porch where they sat, and someday those grandchildren would have children of their own. The ranch would continue, the school would keep teaching, and the story of the widow and the cowboy would become family legend, passed down through generations. But for now, in this moment, it was just the two of them, sitting in the gathering dusk, hands clasped, hearts full. Josephine closed her eyes and breathed in the smell of mesquite and horses and home. This was everything she had never dared to dream of, everything she had thought was lost forever. And it was hers. Truly, completely, wonderfully hers. Years continued to pass with the gentle inevitability of seasons changing. In 1907, Margaret married a neighboring rancher's son, a kind young man who reminded Josephine very much of Austin. The wedding was held at the ranch, just like Josephine and Austin's had been, and as Josephine watched her daughter dance with her new husband, she felt the sweet ache of time passing. Daniel, true to Josephine's hopes, attended normal school and became a teacher. He took a position at the Sonora school that his mother had founded, bringing the story full circle in a way that made Josephine's heart swell with pride. He was patient with his students, encouraging, seeing potential in even the most challenging children, just as she had always tried to do. Thomas and his wife gave Austin and Josephine 4 grandchildren, each one more spirited than the last. The ranch house that had once held just the two of them now rang with the laughter of multiple generations. Sunday dinners became a tradition, with the whole family gathering around the extended table that Austin had built for just this purpose. In 1910, on a warm May evening very much like the one when they had first met, Austin and Josephine celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. Their children had organized a party, inviting friends from all over the county. The ranch was decorated with lanterns and flowers, and a small band played music for dancing. As Austin led Josephine onto the makeshift dance floor in their barn, now fully rebuilt and strong, she laughed at the symmetry of it all. "Do you remember the first time we danced?" she asked. "At our wedding reception. You stepped on my feet at least 3 times. I was nervous. I had never been so happy in my life, and I was terrified something would go wrong." He pulled her closer, and they swayed gently to the music. Nothing went wrong. Everything went right. Clara Morrison, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack, approached them when the dance ended. "You two give me hope," she said, squeezing both their hands. "In a world that can be so hard, you built something beautiful. That school alone has changed this town for the better, and your children are a credit to you both. Thank you, Clara. We owe you a debt we can never repay. Your kindness in those early days meant everything." "Nonsense. You two did all the hard work. I just saw what everyone else should have seen. 2 good people who deserved a chance at happiness." As the party wound down and their guests departed, Austin and Josephine found themselves alone once again on their porch. It had become their place, their sanctuary, the spot where they had shared so many conversations over the years. 32 years, Josephine mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you walked into that saloon. Other times it feels like a lifetime ago. It was a lifetime ago. We were different people then. Were we? Or did we just become more fully ourselves? Austin considered this. Maybe both. You were always strong, Josephine. You were always kind and intelligent and capable. But now you know it. Now you own it. And you were always good. Always decent and compassionate. But now you have a family who loves you, a ranch that thrives, a legacy that will outlast us both. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. In the distance, they could hear a coyote calling, and from the barn, one of the horses whinnied softly. These were the sounds of home, as familiar to them now as their own heartbeats. "You think we've done enough?" Josephine asked suddenly. "Made enough of a difference? What brought this on? I don't know. I suppose I just want to know that our lives mattered, that we left the world a little better than we found it." Austin turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Josephine, look at what we have built. Look at our children, all of them good, hard-working people who treat others with respect. Look at the school that has educated hundreds of children. Look at this ranch that employs families and provides them with honest work. How can you doubt that we have made a difference? When you put it that way, it does sound rather impressive." "It is impressive. You are impressive, and I am honored to have spent these years by your side." Tears slipped down Josephine's cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you, Austin Fairchild, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow. I love you too. Always have, always will." As they sat together in the darkness, Josephine thought about that frightened widow who had lived in a tiny room behind a saloon. She thought about the cowboy who had walked in one day and changed everything with a simple offer. She thought about how love could come when you least expected it, how kindness could transform a life, how second chances were possible if you were brave enough to reach for them. The seasons continued their eternal dance. Springs brought new foals and planting. Summers brought heat and hard work and the satisfaction of labor well done. Autumns brought harvest and cooler temperatures. Winters brought rest and reflection and the cozy warmth of family gathered together. In 1915, Thomas took over complete management of the ranch. Austin, now in his late 50s, was still strong and capable, but he was happy to step back and let his son lead. He spent more time working on special projects, gentling particularly difficult horses, or building furniture for his grandchildren. Josephine continued her involvement with the school, now expanded to serve even more children. She also started writing down her story, thinking that perhaps someday her grandchildren or great-grandchildren might want to know how she and Austin had found each other. She wrote about the hardship and the fear, but mostly she wrote about the hope, the love, and the building of a life beyond anything she had imagined possible. In the spring of 1918, the world was changed by war, and even remote Sonora, Texas felt the impact. Daniel, their youngest, volunteered to serve despite being past the first flush of youth. Josephine was terrified, memories of loss flooding back, but she held her head high and sent her son off with her blessing. Austin stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and together they prayed for Daniel's safe return. Those months while Daniel was overseas were some of the longest of Josephine's life. Every day she watched for the mail, dreading a telegram that might bring devastating news. But Daniel's letters came regularly, full of hope and determination, and gradually the war ended. Daniel came home in early 1919, changed by what he had seen but essentially whole, and Josephine wept with relief in Austin's arms. "We've weathered everything," Austin said, holding her close. "Deaths and births, droughts and storms, even war, and we're still standing, still together." "Because we have each other," Josephine replied. "I could survive anything as long as I have you beside me." Their later years were peaceful. They watched their grandchildren grow into young adults, watched some of them marry and start families of their own. The ranch passed fully into Thomas's hands, though Austin still offered advice when asked. Josephine finally retired from her work with the school, though she continued to tutor children who needed extra help. They traveled some, taking a train to San Francisco to see the Pacific Ocean, visiting Austin's sister in Missouri, going to New Orleans so Josephine could show Austin where she had grown up. But they always came home to the ranch, to the house they had built together, to the land that had given them so much. In 1925, they celebrated their 47th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them. They sat on their porch, as they had done thousands of times before, and talked about everything and nothing. They talked about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch's future, about books they had read and places they wanted to see. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Josephine asked. "When you made your offer, I said a lot of things that first day. You said I would sleep in a respectable house from that night on. Those were your exact words." Austin smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with affection. "I meant it. You deserved respect and safety and a chance to rebuild your life. You gave me all that and so much more. You gave me love, family, purpose. You gave me back my dreams and helped me achieve them. That tiny room in the saloon feels like something from another person's life now." It was another life. This is your life now, Josephine. This has been your life for 47 years and, God willing, for many more to come. They sat together as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, the kind of quiet that comes from contentment rather than emptiness. In the distance, they could see Thomas working with one of the young horses, could hear Margaret's laughter as she played with her grandchildren in the yard. This was legacy, Josephine thought. Not just the land or the buildings or the money they had saved and invested carefully over the years. The legacy was love, was family, was the knowledge that they had built something good and lasting. It was children who knew their worth, grandchildren who understood the value of hard work and compassion, a community that was better for their presence in it. "Thank you," Josephine said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me that day. For seeing past the widow living in a saloon to the woman I could be. For believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself." Austin turned to her, and even after all these years, the love in his eyes still had the power to make her breath catch. "I saw you, Josephine, because you were impossible to miss. You were brave and beautiful and strong, even when you felt anything but. All I did was offer you a chance. You're the one who took it, who worked hard, who built this life alongside me. Never forget that." "We built it together," she corrected. "Every step of the way together." "Together," he agreed and kissed her softly. As night fell over the ranch, stars emerging one by one in the vast Texas sky, Josephine leaned against her husband's shoulder and felt complete contentment wash over her. She had been given a gift, a second chance when she thought all chances were gone. She had been offered respect when the world offered only judgment, love when she expected only loneliness, hope when despair seemed inevitable. And she had seized that gift with both hands, had worked for it and nurtured it and helped it grow into something magnificent. She and Austin had created a life together that honored both of them, that drew on their individual strengths and supported their individual weaknesses. They had built something that would last long after they were gone, in the children they had raised, the land they had tended, the love they had shared so freely. The story of the widow and the cowboy had become legend in Sonora. People still talked about it, about the destitute woman living in the saloon and the stranger who had offered her a lifeline. But Josephine knew the real story was more complex and beautiful than any legend could capture. It was a story of two wounded people finding each other, of respect growing into friendship, growing into love, of hard work and dedication, and the building of something that neither could have achieved alone. It was a story that had started with a simple declaration: "You will sleep in a respectable house from tonight on." And from that declaration, from that promise kept and expanded upon, had grown a lifetime of love, a family, a legacy that would endure. As the years continued to pass, Austin and Josephine aged gracefully, their love deepening with each season. They remained active in their community, beloved by all who knew them. They watched their great-grandchildren come into the world, tiny miracles that carried forward the best of what they had built together. And through it all, they remained each other's anchor, each other's joy, each other's home. The widow who had lived in the saloon and the cowboy who had rescued her had become something far greater than either title suggested. They had become partners, lovers, best friends. They had become the foundation upon which generations would build their own lives. And when, many years later, they passed within months of each other, the town of Sonora mourned the loss of two of its most respected citizens. But they also celebrated the remarkable love story, the life well lived, the legacy of kindness and hard work and devotion that Austin and Josephine Fairchild had left behind. The ranch continued under Thomas's management, then passed to his children, and then to theirs. The school that Josephine had founded still educated children, a lasting monument to her dream of making the world better through education. And the story of how it all began, with a cowboy walking into a saloon and offering a widow a chance at a new life, was passed down through the family as a reminder that love could come from unexpected places, that second chances were possible, and that with courage and compassion, anyone could build a life worth living. In the end, that was perhaps the greatest legacy of all, the knowledge that no matter how dark things seemed, no matter how lost or alone someone might feel, there was always the possibility of hope, of change, of love finding its way in. Austin and Josephine's story proved that, and it would continue to inspire generations long after they were gone, a testament to the transformative power of kindness, respect, and love freely given and gratefully received.